and I'd like to welcome everyone for coming in at early in the morning to join us. And before I introduce our host today, first self-introductions. My name is Timothy Connor. I'm co-chair of the Special Events Committee sponsoring today's event. And before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to go through some housekeeping items. This session is on the record. It's close to the media, but it's going to be recorded for use later, possible use on an ACCJ platform. Also, we invite comments and questions during the Q&A period at the end of the event. Please look at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a Q&A chat box. Click on the chat box and type your question in there, and we'll read the question off and our speaker, Dominic, will answer. Okay. So first, today's event, adjusting to the Corona crisis, and will it change what Japanese people want? Our speaker today is Dominic Carter. He's president and CEO of Carter JRMN. Dominic was a double major graduate in marketing and business studies from the University of South Wales. He's worked in market research in Australia, Japan, and the Asian region for more than 20 years. Dominic came to Japan to start the Millward Brown business here in the mid-90s, and then founded Carter Associates in 2004. Carter Associates is now Carter JMRN, and Dominic is leading the both their quantitative and qualitative research initiatives here. He's highly experienced in cultural adaptation, as well as brand communication strategy and customer emotions and customer emotions. He's also led a wide range of projects covering customer needs, segmentations, digital strategy, and also international marketing and business development programs outside of Japan, in the US, and in Australia. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor over to Dominic. Dominic, it's all yours.
Thank you, Timothy. I'm going to share my screen now and stop my video. So, okay, well, first of all, I hope that you're all keeping safe. I think that's the main thing at the moment, and also that in business terms that you're having some success in adjusting to this new normal that we find ourselves in. We're all facing a pretty uncertain situation, and although it looks like our crisis is not as severe yet as some parts of the US, Japan did actually enter the crisis earlier. Since 2017, we've been taking a measure of consumer sentiment in Japan, and we've had a range of questions on this study, including questions about the image of the US in general, US brands, and last but not least, President Trump. So I'll be able to present you basically 4 waves of this sentiment on the US today. But the timing of our survey coincided with the crisis, so we took the opportunity to add some relevant questions about the current situation. So we've got quite a lot of data to take you through today. And as Tim mentioned, if you do have questions, if you can type it into the Q&A, I'll be happy to answer those at the end. By way of an agenda, I'm going to start by taking you through the design of our sentiment survey that we've been doing since 2017. Then I'm going to do a quick recap on what, in a sense, the mega trends have been during the very new Reiwa era. Then I'm going to follow on by looking at some direct Corona crisis impacts and medium-term outlook, and then some measures on brand USA. So in 2017, we started polling Japanese every year in spring. This year we took the measurement between the 13th and the 18th of March. So the data are very recent, and as I mentioned before, they do coincide with the Corona crisis. The methodology is a web survey. We do 1,000 interviews nationwide. The age band is 15 to 69. The quotas are set so that the survey is population representative. And of course, we have a population representative split of gender. So the data that come out of this study are relatively speaking quite projectable to the population. So it seems like a long time ago now, but the dawn of Rewa in 2019, I think, held the promise of demographically driven social change. It's hard to say whether these are these turning points that we talk about, like here's a new era, here's an anniversary, so on and so forth, whether they're real turning points. But certainly I think that we had a lot of hope, and we still have a lot of hope for renewal in Japanese society. And though all of the megatrends in Japan that are going to drive renewal in many aspects are because we're dealing with a society of dramatically less people of working age. And this is manifesting itself in 4 key areas as far as we believe. The first is the changing world of work. The world of work was already changing in Japan before the corona crisis. And of course, we all know that there's been a massive shift onto digital and working from home throughout recent times. It's also fair to say that a lot of working habits in Japan are quite sticky as well. So there are certainly even people in my office, I doesn't matter how many times I've asked them to work from home, they still turn up to the office. But there is change occurring. The second area is women power. So this is about women not only being better represented in the workforce, but also having some real power and economic power, having their own money to spend. I think will have a big influence on Japanese society. The next area is generational dynamics. Of course, we know that there is a very large aged population in Japan, but the interesting flip side of that is that there's a much smaller number of younger people, and those younger people have scarcity value, for want of a better way of describing it. So I think that the dynamic, what happens among the young in Japan, I think is as interesting as what happens among the aged population. And then, as we know, internationalization has been continuing apace in Japan. We've, of course, postponed the Olympics, but we had a successful Rugby World Cup last year. And of course, there's more and more tourists, more and more foreigners living and working here. I should note too that this survey was taken before the Olympics were postponed. So we asked a question last year and this year: in order for Japan to remain healthy, its working habits and structure need to change. So we can see that in 2019, we had 59% of our sample who agreed to this point, but in 2020, it's 68%. So this idea that change around working habits needs to take place is certainly more to the fore than it was even last year. And of course, the corona crisis is going to drive a lot of that. And we can see here, this is looking at males, this same question on males and females. We can see that especially females this year, 74% of females believe that change around work must take place. So I think that, we are seeing an acceleration of trends through the crisis here, I think often driven by women and the way that they think and feel about things. In terms of the perception of women's progress in society, we had 38% feeling that women are making progress towards equality in society versus 41% this year. So that's a very modest uptick. Also, the numbers are terribly low on that point as well. Interestingly, certainly in 2019, males were much more likely at 47% versus 32% for females to believe that this was the case, that women were making progress. That's not as bad as it was last year, but still males are interestingly more likely to think that women are making progress than women are. A very interesting point there. So just to bring it back to the overall economy, the Japanese economy, as we know, has been very strong in recent years. The unemployment rate in January was 2.4%. Now, we don't know, of course, how that's going to look right now, but before going into this crisis, the economy was very strong. And there has been a strong degree of optimism around the Tokyo Olympics. So we had 55% of people in our survey who said, yes, I'm looking forward to the positive impact on the economy that the Tokyo Olympics will bring. So it was I would characterize it as a fairly cautiously optimistic time until the crisis hit. But in Japan, I've felt for a long time that really the anticipation of disaster is really part of the psyche of people here. And disasters in some respects are kind of part of life. And so we have a question in our survey this year saying disaster is part of life in Japan. 71% of people are agreeing with that statement. So really, at all times, even in good times, Japanese have a sense of preparedness about them. Now, looking at the latest crisis here, this is a timeline. It goes up to the end of last month here. Now, if you remember, we started hearing about this in January. Throughout February, early mid-February, we had the Diamond Princess passengers in quarantine. People were being evacuated from Wuhan. We had the schools closed at the beginning of March. We did our survey in mid-March, and the Olympics were postponed not long after that. At the end of March, we had 1,896 cases, which is a lot lower than the US, but of course there is some discussion, and I have no qualification to get into this discussion about the measurement of this. Measurement seems that the level of testing in Japan seems to have been on the low side, but certainly it seems that we're not affected as severely as the USA at the moment. The next chart here is looking at what people's concerns are on various elements around the crisis. So we have the highest level of concern here on economic downturn and being restricted in my activities. It's much stronger level of concern than we see for family well-being and for food and water safety. So I think that what the picture is that we're looking at is that people are more concerned about the impact on the economy than they are necessarily about themselves being in danger. And anecdotally, that seems to be among people I know. I think that seems to be the case. People also are more likely to see the impacts happening in the broader economy, which kind of means sort of not me. You see a relatively lower level of concern about job security, but those concerns definitely do exist, and there are certainly people who have already been impacted by this. But at the moment, it seems to be sort of people at the time we took the survey, at least, people more concerned about the bigger picture economic downturn. But at least some impact is seen by about 4 in 5 people. So it's a major impact for 20%, so 1 in 5, and some impact for about 60% of people, about 3 in 5 seeing some impact. We've seen this time and time again. I remember in the financial crisis about 10 years ago, it seemed like I lived in Ebisu around that time, and it seemed that almost overnight, I'm sure it took more time than that, but almost overnight it seemed that a lot of local restaurants and bars had closed. And people in Japan, because they're quite prepared, will turn their spending off quite quickly when something happens. We asked a question in our survey about various areas of people's spending, and we asked about the net loss in or what their behaviour will be in the next 1 to 2 months and 3 to 6 months. So this number here, negative number, is the percentage of our sample who are going to increase their spending in the area, subtracted by those who are going to decrease. So we can see for areas like dining out, group activities, theme parks, music, entertainment shows, cinema. We're seeing a very strong pullback in spending in those categories. And they will be quite persistent too in 3 to 6 months as well. So there's going to be a medium-term pullback in all of these areas. Fashion goods as well, seeing a decrease there. Taxis, jewelry, to a lesser extent, household appliances, electronics, and services to do with relaxation. In terms of the government providing support and confidence for people to maintain their normal lifestyle and spending, we certainly have more people disagreeing than agreeing to that point. Almost half of people disagree that the government is giving them the confidence that they need to maintain their lifestyle and spending in most areas. But it's not only, there are some businesses that are actually doing quite well. I saw some news this morning on Nitori furniture store chain, and their profits have actually risen throughout the crisis. Certainly, well, the obvious face masks, I guess we had to ask that, but they're definitely a gain in face mask purchasing, but online shopping, seeing increases, home delivery services like Uber Eats, Demakan, streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime, streaming educational services with all the kids at home, ebooks, video games, and supplements and skincare looking pretty stable actually throughout. So definitely there's lower spending overall, as you can imagine, in the economy, but what spending is there is being channeled into certain areas. This question is looking at the impact on, perceived impact on people's personal lives in the future. So we have 80% of people saying in the next 1 to 2 months, we expect to see at least some impact. That goes down 3 to 6 months, and a year from now, that number goes from 80 to 45% of our sample feeling some impact. But of course, at the same time, we see that a year from now, almost a third of people are saying, well, look, I just can't predict what's going to happen. So it is a very uncertain situation, even if the direct impact is seen to be resolving. In terms of the working environment, we have about, in mid-March at least, nearly 70% of full-time workers see their working environment pretty much as usual. And as I mentioned, I think some of those, of course, you can't telework every job. There are of course massive numbers of jobs that cannot be teleworked, but also people's habits are very sticky and managers are sticky and so forth. So how is consumer confidence tracking now versus previous years? I think we can all guess that it will have taken a hit. This question here is one that we ask every year on overall economic sentiment, and we simply ask the respondent to indicate how they currently feel about the condition of the Japanese economy. And it's in a sense a dynamic question in that we ask, are we feeling more positive to less positive here? So the bottom number here in 2017, 34% here. These are the pessimists. The optimists, 19% in 2017 here. You can see that pessimists, generally speaking, outnumber the optimists even when times are good. I put that down to general conservatism on the part of the Japanese here. Certainly we can see from 2019 to 2020, we're looking at a rise in pessimists from 45 to 76 and a fall in optimists from 19 to 8. So the crisis is having a huge impact on people's perception of the economy. The next question we're looking at here is looking at my personal financial prospects regarding the wider economy and my place in it. So we can see from 2019 to 2020, we've seen an increase from 37 to 50 on the pessimists there, but of course it's not as large as the perceptions in the wider economy. So people feel that the economy is suffering. Maybe I'm not quite as suffering as much as the wider economy. It's happening at this point in time when we took the survey, at least. It's probably more likely to be happening to someone else than happening to me. This is a question that we ask each year as well about people's confidence about their future condition in life. And we can see here, 2018, optimist 34%, 32% 2019, a bit of an erosion there from 18 to 19 and 2020, but still actually holding up, a bit of an erosion, of course, but still holding up quite well. So people's perceptions about the future are actually looking quite resilient, which is good news. It gives us some indication that people feel that the situation is temporary. This is a question that we ask about people's projected spending 1 year from now. So it's been, if we look at 2019 and 2020, it's actually looking fairly stable. There's a bit of an uptick here in that people are saying they'll be spending a little or a lot less, but it's actually, considering everything that's going on, people's perception of what they're spending is going to be in a year is quite stable. So it's actually quite a positive finding, I think, here. If we look 2 to 5 years, then again, we've got 38% in 2019 optimistic about their spending in 2 to 5 years and 39% in 2020. So people are really looking beyond the crisis and saying, well, yep, basically, I think I'm going to be fine. Situation won't be that different. So moving on to these measures that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk on perceptions of the USA. Now we've been taking this measure since 2017. In March 2017, we started tracking this because at the time there was a lot of controversy around the new administration, and we felt that it would be useful to track this over time. In 2020, we have positives of 38% to the US versus negatives of 17%. Most people every year are neutral about the US. I think that's obviously, it's not the most important issue for people in Japan, the relationship with the US, but certainly the positives are outweighing the negatives. And it has been basically trending positively in the last 3 years as well. If you look at these unfavorable numbers here, 25 in 2018, 20 in 2019, 17, 2020. So it's moving in a positive direction for the US. Although it is fair to say that President Trump is not Japan's favorite American, but nevertheless, certainly since 2018, we've seen unfavorables to President Trump reducing here, 54, 49, 44 here. So again, people in this country have got used to him and becoming, less negative, if not a little bit more positive too. So that's that finding there. We started asking in 2017, basically, is your perception of the administration making you more or less likely to buy American? We started off at 27% on that measure in 2017, and we're down to 19% in 2020. So that's coming off the boil as an issue. In terms of consumer perceptions of US brands, comparing 2017, relatively speking, was not very strong on that measure, but we did increase in 2018 to 32, increased again in 2019 to 37, and 2020 at 35. There's some slight erosion there in that measure, but certainly is holding up at a stronger level than what it was in 2017. Somewhat pleasingly here, we've been asking people to what extent they'd like to travel to the US for pleasure. So in 2018, that was 52%, 2019, 61%. And even throughout the crisis here, we've seen that number hold up pretty well at 59%. So that's a positive there. This is a question we ask on people's preferred destinations for international travel, and we can see that a preference for the US, I should say, is trending very positively year on year, which we can't say for other countries as well. If you compare this to Italy here, that's a different picture. So again, a positive indication that when the situation normalizes, there's some pretty strong structural demand for travel to the US. Another area which is of relevance to a number of US companies is the Integrated Resort Project. Year on year, we've seen familiarity with the Integrated Resort Project rise from 44% to 54%. These are people who know quite a bit, or at least know something about the IR project. In terms of brand awareness of IR operators, most people are not aware of any of them, but certainly the two leading brands there, Las Vegas Sands and MGM, as American brands, and most of them, of course, are American brands here, are the most prominent in that area. Of course, for integrated resorts, the sales point for this moving forward is going to, especially in an uncertain economy, we've seen those very, very high numbers on uncertainty from our survey. It's probably going to become more important as an issue. People aren't thinking about this kind of thing right now, but of course, the ability to bring in tax revenue and bring economic benefits and increase tourism is something that operators are going to really probably benefit from emphasizing in their communications. Lastly here, transparency in society. Of course, transparency with regard to integrated resorts is very important, but of course it's extremely important with regard to the current crisis and a whole range of other things. And this is something, transparency, that's been consistently in strong demand here. So we have 3/4 of people in 2020 saying we need more transparency in our society, including government and business here. So transparency is really something that I think is indicated by consumers, very much something that they're looking for. And I think it's going to be very important in terms of building their confidence, which will be needed for the recovery when it comes. So in summary, short term, we can see confidence has taken a big hit. There are huge swings in our numbers year on year. But not all areas are losing areas in the current economy, and digital entertainment, of course, stands out as a winner. Anything digital is likely to have had more emphasis placed on it in the last couple of months. Medium to long term, the outlook is cautious, but I would say not overly pessimistic. We see those measures of, what my spending's going to be in a year, 5 years, really haven't moved that much. So it certainly looks like people can look beyond the current situation. Therefore, it pays to pay attention to those long-term trends that I was talking about at the beginning of the presentation here. They will still be in play and are still really going to, define the opportunity in the market. But of course, transparency and genuine engagement will be a must to maintain trust moving forward. So it's hard to emphasize enough the need for government and business to be very open about the progress of the crisis and to communicate more than they normally would. So that is pretty much what I had planned to present this morning. So I'm going to hand it back to Besma, who will read out the questions, and I will attempt to answer your questions to the best of my ability.
Well, thank you very much, Dominic. On behalf of everybody, thank you. Right now, we'll just assume there's some virtual applause there. Thank you. Now, everyone, If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A. If you click Q&A, you can type in your questions there. Please give your name and affiliation if you can. And we'll read off the questions and Dominic will answer them for you. So I'll allow you to go ahead and read them. Okay.
Okay, so we have our first question. It's from Eric Greenberg. He says, great presentation, thank you. What percentage of people taking the survey are taking it every year, and what percentage of people are new each year?
We take a random sample every year, so they're completely different respondents each year, but they're sampled in the same way every year. So the results from year to year have the same level of representativeness. Okay, next question.
I believe we are waiting for the next question.
Okay.
Okay. So the next question, how long do you think it will take Japanese consumers to regain their confidence and start spending again after the COVID-19 crisis subsides?
I think our data indicate that it won't be longer than a year. And I would take a guess that we're looking at about 6 months.
Okay, next question. This is from Heather from EY Japan. Fantastic presentation, many thanks. How quickly do you think that attitudes will change once the crisis is de-escalated?
I think they'll probably move back. I mean, the attitudes cover a whole sort of wide range of areas. So if you want to ask me more specifically areas, that's fine as well. But I think you're probably looking at about a 3 to 6 month period after this all dies down for stuff to normalize. But I do think that there are certain experiences that people have been through that are going to change the way that they think about certain things. And I think this is especially true in the area of working. And, you know, I think there is I'm sure there's a reappraisal on how we work. You know, do we need to work in offices the way that we do? Like what really defines a necessary function versus an unnecessary function, that type of thing. So I think that, you know, your basic attitudes will sort of, you know, kind of go back into where they were. But I think depending on, especially on personal experiences, some of those attitudes are going to be permanently changed. And I think there would be some value probably in taking another measure this year in 6 months' time, just to see how that's actually developing.
Okay, the next question is from Paul Kraft. He is curious if you've seen any news or changing on food shopping habits in the supermarket, online, or in convenience stores.
Okay, so I can't comment on that with regard to any data that we've taken, but I think that there's been you've had this very in some ways understandable panic buying, even though it's been unnecessary. But there's been quite a lot of you know, buying out of necessities. Even yesterday in the supermarket, you know, I saw there was no pasta, which there'd been plenty of, like, everyone had taken rice before, and then it was pasta. So I think that sort of very immediate response, you can see that. I think we can all see that. What this experience of people feeling that they've had to consume like this, what this does to their attitudes moving forward, I think is possibly a more interesting question, and probably worth us taking a look at.
Okay, the next question is from Michael Bell. Do you think there is enough momentum with younger, more agile enterprises to change the older, harder thinking of the larger companies?
Well, it'll be like Japan still has a very rigid structure, but I think, you know, these times like these show that those companies that are agile and flexible are going to do extremely well. So if you were looking for kind of like a theme for success moving forward, it would be flexibility. So either the existing companies need to learn how to be flexible, or younger people and younger companies are going to start to be more successful.
Okay, and this question is from Debbie Howard. What would you say will be the quickest categories to recover?
I think we can. We did in the survey, we measured what would be 1 to 2 months, the impact in 1 to 2 months, then 3 to 6 months. So I would say that looking at those numbers, I think, you know, people are probably going to snap back to dining out pretty quickly. I think, you know, things that let people let off steam a bit, like live entertainment and that kind of thing, I think will come back. I think slower to come back might be things like cinemas, where people are going to, you know, really want to think twice, I think, about being in enclosed spaces like that. I think beyond that, it depends really on where the economy pans out. So if you're looking at the luxury sector, certainly there's a downturn there, but how well it snaps back, I think, will depend on optimism. So for the more expensive categories, like the overall general economic optimism will be important. But I would anticipate that people will try to snap back to some level of normality in their lives. So I think restaurants and cafes and so forth should come back fairly quickly.
Okay, next question is from Gordon Hayton. Do you think the impact to brick and mortar retail will be last or transformational as people become accustomed to making online purchases?
I suspect that it will that this is accelerating trends that were already in place. So the bricks and mortar retailers really need to think about the experience that they're creating for their customers, and looking at retail as a form of leisure and entertainment as much as anything, and possibly, you know, information, entertainment, that sort of thing. So I think that all of these trends become accelerated at times like this. So I think bricks and mortar are really going to have to think about the experience that they're creating. Otherwise, yeah, they're going to be in an even less attractive situation than they are now.
The next question, tell us a little more about the results in terms of attitudes toward IRs coming to Japan. I've heard that it was females who are holding all the cards.
Yes, well, females are way less enthusiastic about IR than males. The familiarity with IR has increased, but there have been, I think, as we know, there has been some scandal around it recently. I think in general, though, the importance that people place on the project has been repositioned through the crisis. So I think it's important that the operators, if they want to put themselves in a strong position, will continue to communicate what the benefits of IR are. And I personally believe that they need to really think about what their communication strategy looks like towards women, and how they can convince women who will make a lot of the decisions to visit IR outside of the core gambling target, which of course is male. Women will have a big impact on that. So I think that you know, having a strong strategy around communications and execution for the operators will be very important moving forward. But IR is not the top of people's considerations at the moment, but it may well come back into top of mind as we deal with the economic fallout.
Next question. Where would be a reliable source for us to monitor statistics on COVID patient status in Japan?
That is not my, I have to say that's not my area. But there are stats that are published by the government to the extent that you believe those stats. And I don't see that we have much choice other than to do so at the moment. So that's really all I can say about that.
Next question. Do you think the secondhand luxury shops will benefit in this time of uncertainty?
They certainly will if the economic times become concretely worse. I think there's been more of a trend. What would I call it? A more sort of rational trend around luxury in some respects, which is a long-term trend. So I suspect that anything that's seen to offer better value in a tougher economic time is going to benefit.
Next question. The Japanese government, like many others, are outspending themselves to prop up the economy. This could be a time to push the administrative and deregulation agenda. You mentioned the IR area. Do you see any other areas where you would like to see more changes in the examples, digital health?
Sorry, you're cutting out there.
Oh, let me repeat the question. Yeah. The Japanese government, like many others, are outspending themselves to prop up the economy. This could be a time to push the administrative and deregulation agenda. You mentioned the IR area. Do you see any other areas where you would like to see more changes in this respect? Examples like digital health.
Well, we certainly, I mean, our job is really to help our clients take the consumer with them on these journeys towards deregulation. So of course we support, I personally support more deregulation in many areas, but it can't move any faster than, or there are going to be problems if you move faster than the people. So IR is a good example of that, where the government can't really move faster than public opinion. Can't move that much faster, put it that way. So I think in all of these areas, like telemedicine and whatever, like I think we need to really be looking at what is the is the consumer well informed about that? Can we take them along on that journey? I think that from my perspective, given the work that we do, that's the most important thing. If you want deregulation, you need to make sure that the consumer's on board with that and indeed support it.
I believe that was the last question. If anyone else would like to ask another question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen.
Bisman, sorry, let me jump in. A link to believable numbers on the COVID crisis has just been posted in the Q&A. So if you click on Q&A, you can get the link there.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Oh, I believe there's one more question.
Oh, okay, yep.
What would be your top 3 takeaways from your survey?
Well, top three takeaways is that in the short term, it's very bad. In the medium term, I think if it doesn't get any worse, I think things will go back to normal. And our data indicate that at least when we took the measure in the middle of March, that people were going to snap back. So I think taking cautious but not pessimistic, I think, is probably the right way to play it if you're dealing with businesses that deal with the consumer. And the third takeaway is that those long-term trends that we have in Japan are still very much in place. So I think the danger is that we you know, we become overly pessimistic, even though it's appropriate to be very cautious that at the current time, but that we don't become that pessimistic, because the consumer hasn't really, the reality is they haven't really been hit by this personally that hard yet, according to this. So if it doesn't get any worse, then I think we're probably okay, and you need to really be continuing to look at those long-term trends.
If anyone else would like to ask a question, please utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen.
Okay. Well, it seems that there aren't any more questions. So on behalf of everyone, Dominic, once again, let me give you a virtual clap. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much for the presentation today. And it's been very, very helpful. And for everyone, I believe that Dominic has mentioned that if you are interested in these slides, that he's willing to share the slides with you. Please contact the ACCJ office about that. And the slides could be shared with you later. Before we close for today, I want to remind everyone, today is the first day of this, quote, state of emergency, emerging state of emergency. And the ACCJ is planning a series of these type of webinars and teleconference calls to address the various concerns that will be coming up going forward. So the best place to check for that and other statistics, links, etc., is the Business Continuity Network on the ACCJ site. We have another event coming up this week, hosted by one of our former presidents, on leadership, creativity, and action during a crisis. And if you check out the slides or check out the ACCJ site, you'll see all of the things that are coming up going forward. Once again, thank you for coming this morning on day one of the emergency situation. I think on behalf of the ACCJ and everybody here, we all hope that everyone stays safe, stay home, and let's do the best that we can. Thank you very much for joining today. Goodbye.